Welcome to the planet's original haunted house, the ocean, where evolution tried every weird idea at least once and often kept the worst ones. Tonight, we'll slip beneath waves that no human ever saw and meet the architects of fear: armor-plated biters, scissor-jawed sharks, reptilian torpedoes and cephalopods with too many opinions. It's a documentary meets dark monologue, so yes, the facts are real. The sarcasm is just a flotation device. Before we descend, do me a favour. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location below. You might want to know how far your nearest shoreline used to be a feeding ground. Ready? Deep breath, lights off. Descent begins. Drop into the Cambrian and the first thing you notice is how loud the silence feels. No whales, no beat, no coral reefs, humming with clownfish PR campaigns, just a dim green-blue cathedral where sunlight dissolves into murk, and everything is experimenting with being alive. The rules aren't established yet. Jaws are a rumour. Spines are a new hobby. The ocean is basically a biotech incubator run by chaos. And the star product rolling off the line is fear. Something glides past you that is not a shrimp, not a squid, and definitely not your friend. A metre-long body flexes like a ribbon of muscle, side flaps rippling in perfect sequence, left, right, left, forward, as if the water itself were a treadmill. At the front, two serrated armour will fold and unfold with the prim confidence of a machine that has already done the math. This is a Nomalocaris, which is Latin for "please don't make me explain this to my parents." Its mouth is a rotating ring of hardened plates, the infamous oral cone, like someone put a pineapple corer on shuffle mode. When those forelimbs snap shut, the party's over. Soft-bodied neighbours become soup. Trilobites, those armoured A+ students of the seafloor, end up with literal bite marks etched into their exoskeletons like the ocean's earliest performance reviews. The eyes are the part that really break you. Fossils from places like the Emu Bay Shale show that some of these predators had eyes with over 16,000 lenses each. Imagine a pair of high-end security cameras glued to a torpedo. You can't sneak past that. You can't even exist past that without paperwork. The Cambrian didn't just invent predation, it invented surveillance. But for every unholy vacuum cleaner cruising the mid-water, the benthic world is an open-air fashion show of armour and anxiety. Trilobites shuffle like cautious coins, jointed legs hidden under a calcified shell, compound eyes peeking out, antennae testing the future 1mm at a time. They can roll into balls like living padlocks, spikes pointing outward, a portable fortress for when the neighbourhood goes loud. Some grow tiny ridges and horns. Some sculpt their heads into shields big enough to snowboard on. You can practically hear the evolutionary copywriting, now with 20% more carapace. Nearby, a creature like a bristling hairbrush crawls over the sediment, its back a field of swords. This is Hallucigenia, the fossil that dared scientists to pick a correct up and a correct down. Early reconstructions put the spines on the ground and the tiny legs waving in the water like sad spaghetti. Later studies flipped it. The soft, lobed legs grip the substrate while the dorsal spines say with total professionalism, "Do not touch." Evolution here has no fine print. It shouts its legal disclaimers in spikes. Then there's Opabinia, which looks like 5 different animals agreed to share one body. 5 eyes sprout from its head like a periscope bouquet. A flexible proboscis ends in a little claw, perfect for plucking things it shouldn't. You watch it hover over a wrinkled patch of mud, then dip that grabby trunk and yoink a morsel out like a magician pulling a coin from your ear. If the magician then ate the coin with a smile and 5 unblinking stares. It's delicate, it's precise, it's unsettling in the way good dentistry is unsettling. Wiwaxia shuffled past Mum next. A soft loaf rolled in metallic scales, with 2 long dorsal blades that look suspiciously like it borrowed cutlery from the future. It's not fast, it's not clever, it's not here to make friends, it's here because the ocean just added bite to the menu, and Wiwaxia responded with no thank you, I brought armour. If you squint, you can see the Red Queen arms race warming up, everyone running just to stay in place. Predators growing sharper, prey growing harder, and the water thickening with the paperwork of survival. Spines, plates, hooks, eyes, glands, shells, speed. A delicate ribbon flickers in the gloom. Pikaia, one of the earliest chordates, waving a notochord like a future promise. This is not a fish. It's the idea of a spine shopping for a body. It wriggles with side-to-side grace, a kind of prelude to everything that will eventually sprint, gallop or sprint, and then philosophize about galloping. If you feel a personal connection, that's not hubris, that's lineage tapping you on the shoulder from 500 million years away. The setting is the Burgess Shale and other Cambrian stage dives, Chengjiang too, places where mud became a time capsule so detailed you can count gill filaments and daydream about soft tissues that rarely fossilize. The ambience is low oxygen, high ambition. Chemistry has finally offered enough calcium and oxygen for shells and movement to get weird. Food webs knit themselves in frantic loops, detritus to grazers, grazers to snatchers, snatchers to the master snatcher in the middle water column, that jackknifing nightmare with 16,000 reasons to see you in an oral cone that doesn't care about your plucky underdog arc. You glide over a reef that isn't a reef in the coral sense. It's a clutter of sponges and early wannabe reef builders, the furniture of the Cambrian living room. Between their lattices, tiny arthropods scuttle like pickpockets in training. Morella, dainty, almost elegant, fans its feathery appendages, filtering microscopic meals and hoping the big players are busy elsewhere. Spoiler, they're not. Nothing stays hidden for long because eyes have arrived, and once vision gets good, ambiguity goes extinct. Even the sediment tells a story. Trackways ribbon across it, little dotted lines of indecision that end abruptly in a smear. Somebody's last sentence, cut off mid-word. Burrows dive down and zigzag, panic but organised panic. You can follow a trilobite's path until bam! The trace stops and the clay records a struggle. The Cambrian writes in verbs: pursue, probe, pinch, perforate. What makes it creepy isn't just the tooth and armour fashion show, it's how new everything is and how fast it's being weaponized. Vision doesn't appear politely. It shows up with a squad and a budget. Muscles don't just flex, they form conveyor belts of movement. Those undulating side flaps on an Anomalocaris creating lift with each ripple. The tail fan steering like a rudder off a war canoe. Sensory arrays bloom across exoskeletons, bristles tasting the current, antennae mapping the invisible, thousands of lenses converting light into judgment. This is the original arms race, and the arms are literal. Now watch what happens when an Anomalocaris finds a trilobite that believes in its armour a little too much. The predator fans forward, flaps beating in a whispering drum roll. The frontal appendages reach, spines interlocking like a two-part trap, and the trilobite is suddenly a paper cup in a hydraulic press. The oral cone rotates, plates meeting plates, and the sound in your head is not crunch but inevitability. You can almost feel the pressure differential as the shell yields, the soft interior becoming data. Somewhere in the genome of 1,000 trilobite lineages, alarms go off. Generation by generation they add ridges, enroll faster, grow eyes with more facets, learn to vanish into the sediment at the first flicker of a shadow. Predation sculpts prey. Prey sculpts predators. The water fills with sculpture. From the corners drift the misfits that make the Cambrian feel like a dream you're not entirely sure you want to wake from. Nectocaris slips by, a cephalopod-looking enigma that scholars still argue about over coffee that will not exist for 500 million years. Fuxianhui shows off nervous system complexity that feels indecent for its age. Every time you try to put things into neat categories, the Cambrian picks up the categories and assembles them into a creature with 5 eyes and a grabbing hose. And then you notice the light fading. Not the sun, your optimism. You realise that terror here is not personal, it's procedural. There are no villains, there are only iterations. The horror is algorithmic. If a shape works, more lenses, faster flaps, spikier spines, the ocean replicates it with the cold enthusiasm of a photocopier. If a shape fails, it sinks into the mud and becomes part of our museum. The Cambrian is not asking for your approval. It doesn't even believe in the concept. It is busy inventing the prerequisites for future nightmares. Jaws that hinge and unhinge, bodies that streamline into rockets, senses that chew on photons until the world becomes information. Back at the surface, if you were foolish enough to go back, you'd see nothing. No footprints, no fins, no warning. The water would look calm, like a sheet laid over a restless patient. But underneath, for the first time in Earth's history, fear has a direction. It moves with purpose. It sees you before you see it. It learns you. It files you under edible or problem, and if you're lucky, you get to be the second one for now. So when people say the Cambrian explosion like it's a fireworks show, remember it wasn't sparkles. It was a policy change. Nature toggled predation from beta to full release, and the patch notes included eyes, armor, speed, and most importantly, bite. Everything after this is a sequel. The ocean never forgot what it learned down here. It just kept making the monsters better at their jobs. The water is clearer now, a colder blue that carries sound like gossip and light like a knife. The Cambrian scrappy street fight has matured into something organised, almost elegant. The Ordovician Sea has rules, supply lines, neighbourhoods. It also has a new law enforcement, long, pale, and perfectly indifferent. You don't see the hunter at first because you're looking for teeth, for a face, for the animated warning signs evolution usually posts. Instead, you get geometry, a straight, tapering shell chambered like a flute, drifting with the fatal patience of a spear deciding who deserves it. Orthocones don't hurry, they don't need to. Their bodies are hidden deep in the shell's open end, the living room, the only wet, soft part of a very dry, very hard idea. Behind them, the shell is parcelled into chambers, sealed by curved walls called septa. Those chambers are not for storage, they are for physics. Fluids and gases shuttle in and out through a fleshy tube, the siphuncle, threaded like a lifeline from the animal's body back through every room of the shell. Adjust the mix and you change your buoyancy. Change your buoyancy and you own the vertical. Imagine possessing the ability to float like a feather, or sink like a key, all because your plumbing is smarter than everyone else's skeleton. Sometimes they hang nearly vertical, the long shell a pale exclamation point, the business end, the aperture, tilted down into the dark like a question you already know the answer to. Other times they level out and cruise horizontally over crinoid meadows, matching the slow sway of sea lilies with a predator's metronome calm. Either way, propulsion is a flex. Draw water into the mantle cavity, squeeze, and jet it out through a muscular funnel, the hypernomy. It's not swimming, it's recoil. A precise, pulse-quiet rocket burn. One twitch and the spear is suddenly somewhere else, and something small and overconfident isn't. Everything below you is new and busy. The Great Ordovician Biodiversification event is underway, a mouthful that means biodiversity went from "that's cute" to "we need spreadsheets." First corals, tabulates and rugged little rogozans start stitching together real reefs with sponges and bryozoans, building stone cities out of patient chemistry. Brachiopods clamp the seafloor like tidy, symmetrical clams that never learn the word whimsical. Crinoids bloom in forests, stems anchoring into the carbonate substrate, feathery arms combing the current for edibles with the polite persistence of tax auditors. Graptolites, colonies suspended like delicate zigzags, drift through the water column, turning sunlight and plankton into architecture. Even fish are testing out being fish, jawless, armoured in patches, experimenting with being streamlined without yet understanding the full joy of a bite. Into this bustle slides the orthocone, unblinking and very awake. The head has eyes. Yes, big, lensy, honest eyes that evolved for truth, not romance. A beak-like jaw waits behind them, and a tongue armed with a rasping conveyor of teeth. The radulae moves with the relentless logic of a paper shredder. Tentacles ring the mouth, a prim circle of flexible options. The orthocode doesn't gesticulate. It edits. A trilobite scuttles beneath, tracing a confident line between crinoid stalks. It is armoured, enrolled when spooked, gifted with compound eyes that convert light into urgency, and yet statistically on the menu. You can read this in fossils, healed gouges, U-shaped notches, shell fractures smoothed over by living tissue. The Ordovician keeps receipts. The trilobite pauses to test the current, antennae tasting for chemical gossip. Molted shells, injured neighbours, the metallic whisper of dissolved minerals. Above, the orthocone twitches its hyponome just enough to adjust pitch, aiming the aperture like the muzzle of a quiet device. Tentacles extend, the beak closes, and the trilobite becomes a lesson issued in installments across geologic time. Armour is a conversation, not a guarantee. Do not mistake the straight shell for simplicity. Coiled nautiloids will come into fashion, and later the dandy ammonites will turn spiral into religion. But straight is a choice. Hydrostatic stability, predictable handling, generous interior volume. The siphuncle on some of the giants, the endocerids, is a thick ventral cable packed with conical deposits, endocones, that stiffen and weight the system like a keel, is the kind of engineering that would make a naval architect lean over the drafting table and say we could. Length estimates get dramatic in the literature. 5 meters, 8, even more depending on which fossil you ask, and how much of it is actually there, but the exact number is less important than the vibe. The top predator is a javelin with a brain and tentacles. Watch how it uses the seascape. Over patch reefs, it drifts just above the skyline, casting a long, thin shadow that means nothing to a creature that's never survived an eclipse. Along carbonate ramps, it follows the incline, converting geography into stalking lanes. In deeper water, where the light becomes rumour and the plankton thins, it hangs mid-column and listens with its eyes, reading silhouettes for the grammar of panic. When food is small, it grazes, tentacle sifting, beak trimming. When food is appropriately sized, it arranges a meeting and ends it quickly. The ocean responds the way it always does, by inventing problems for the predator to solve. Trilobites add ridges and spines, enlarge their eyes, and perfect the art of vanishing into the sediment like coins into couch cushions. Some brachiopods develop thicker shells, some crinoids lift their crowns a little higher, arms curling faster, every feather a net. The arms race moves into materials science. Calcite gets workshopped, fibres align, microstructures copy the logic of cliffs. You can feel the Red Queen panting in the back of the room, run faster to stay in place. The orthocone's supremacy isn't universal or permanent, it's situational, which is worse. On good days, it is an unanswerable question. On bad days, it is a large tube with bills. It must molt its skin, heal its edges, keep its buoyancy tuned so the shell's air doesn't betray it. A chamber too light and you bob like a cork. Too heavy and you become archaeology. The siphuncle hums, pumping ions to pull water out of the chambers, letting gas diffuse in, constant micro-decisions that add up to hover, don't drown. This world swarms with minor anxieties that add up to major theatre. A conodont, tiny, eel-like, sporting a mouthful of phosphatic graspers, flickers through the plankton and disappears before you can assign it a personality. A nautiloid with a more compact early coil, because not everyone is committed to linear aesthetics, slides past and peels off into shallower water, content to annoy small invertebrates while its straight-shelled cousin auditions for apex. Overhead, a thin rain of graptolite bodies in black streamers whenever currents die. A falling skyline for creatures below to pass with their taste buds. Then winter arrives, not the polite seasonal kind, but the kind that moves continents. Gondwana sprawls over the South Pole, ice sheets spread, sea levels fall like a slow planetary breath held too long. The late Ordovician turns the thermostat down without warning, and coastlines retreat, draining the shallow seas that powered so much of this prosperity. Reefs shiver in the air. Crinoid forests become hills of calcium and regret. Oxygen sorting in the water column changes the rules of who can breathe where. If your hunting strategy relies on broad shallow shelves, congratulations, you're about to learn inland geography. The orthocone does not compose a manifesto about climate. It adjusts or it dies. Some follow the water down the continental slope, trading light for depth, clarity for consistency. Others track the shrinking coastlines, corral what's left of the trilobites, and discover that apex is a lease, not a title. Extinctions scythe through the community. Graptolites thin, brachiopods stagger, corals blink out and then back in later with new blueprints. In the wreckage, nautiloids still exist. They always seem to. Some lineages shrink, some experiment with tighter coils, some relocate. But the design persists. A brainy head, a ring of arms, a shell divided into twin chapters, and the ability to say up or down with a chemical sentence. When the ice sighs and retreats and the seas creep back, the ocean is not the same. It never is after a reset. But the straight-shell silhouette still moves through the water like a rumour you can measure. Apex written with a ruler. Later ages will draft new monsters, the plated guillotines of the Devonian, the reptilian torpedoes of the Mesozoic. But the template is here. Control your depth, own the column, see what others cannot, and turn precision into fear. The spear learned to hunt, and the ocean learned to respect straight lines. The water goes brown-green, and suddenly you're standing ankle-deep in the Silurian, which is a terrible idea because this shallows is not a beach. It's an invitation. The sunlight comes in smeared, filtered through suspended silt and the polite waving of sea lilies. There are no waves as you know them, just the long, heavy exhale of a lagoon that sometimes pretends to be the sea and sometimes pretends to be a river mouth. Brackish, warm, quiet in the way a loaded crossbow is quiet. Something bumps your calf and the bump has armour. It comes back around, this time broadside, and you finally see it, a low, armoured rectangle of intent with a tail. The head, really a shield, the prosoma, rakes the water like a wedge. Two large compound eyes sit on the top, glossy mosaics built out of hundreds of lenses, each one a tiny verdict on your existence. Between them, two little ocelli, the don't mind us simple eyes, read the overhead light like a clock. This isn't a fish. This is a chelicerae, kin to horseshoe crabs and spiders, a design family that looked at jaws and said, "No thanks, we'll eat with scissors." The mouth faces down, guarded by plates and appendages that do double duty as utensils and cruelty. And at the back, the tail, the telson, tapers to a spine or a blade or a leaf, depending on the brand. It can steer, it can brace. In a pinch, it can remind you to leave. The legs count off like drum beats, 1, 2, 3, 4 for walking and grabbing, the last pair expanded into oars, broad paddles with joints that fold and unfurl in a slow practice stroke. When the animal wants to cruise, those paddles sweep back and down, pushing water the way a rower silently lifts a boat. When it wants to pivot, the telson flicks, a rudder in a heartbeat. And when it wants to be somewhere else, the entire creature becomes a sudden geometry, flat, streamlined, armor plates nesting, legs tucking, paddles carving. The mud dimple where it just was fills with a curl of silt, and the conversation moves on, without you. You've met a Eurypterid. The marketing later calls them sea scorpions, which is not accurate biologically, but is extremely accurate emotionally. They're not true scorpions, they just do an excellent impression of something you should not step on. They arrive in the Ordovician, bloom in the Silurian, diversify wildly in the Devonian, and they do not limit themselves to one water type. Marine, sure. Brackish lagoons, lovely. Rivers and lakes, absolutely. Some lineages are basically bouncers for estuaries. They molt like their arthropod cousins, cracking open the exoskeleton and wriggling out of their own hard past. Fossil beds are full of empty suits, ghost bodies, because when you grow by shedding your shell, you leave paperwork. If you're picturing a single kind, the ocean laughs and brings out the catalogue. There's Eurypterus, the crowd favourite in places like the Bertie Waterlime of New York, about as long as your forearm to your thigh, a sleek paddler that treats lagoons like personal swimming pools. There's Mixopterus, with spiny forelimbs flexed into barbed laundry racks, ideal for pinning slippery things to the menu. There's Hibbertopterus, a wide tank-like sweeper that trawls the substrate with rakes, stirring up invertebrate confetti and inhaling what the net catches. And then there are the pterygotids, the overachievers, like Pterygotus and Acutiramus, and finally the poster chum for You Live Here Now, Jacalopterus, which may hit 2.5 meters of nope. Pterygotids bulk up the front claws chelicerae into curved, toothed pliers the size of your forearm. Their eyes are big and placed forward enough to flirt with depth perception. They are built to take meetings with anything soft, slow or smug. Their hunting style wastes nothing. The paddles lift them in a hover over the seabed, while their forward arms test the world like a blind man's cane that bites back. Cetal hairs, microscopic bristles line the appendages, tasting currents for chemical truths, a wounded fish bleeding into the brine, a trilobite's last anxious molting, a cluster of worm tubes that forgot to be discreet. The chelicerae click in small calibrations, measuring prey with soundless arithmetic, width, hardness, leverage. Then the strike, a snap, a fold, a paddle kick, and the prey is upside down, pressed to the belly, where the mouth and plate-like metastoma can go to work like a chest-mounted cutting board. They don't always hunt. Some sweep. The stylonurines, cousins with less flashy claws, carry comb-like spines along with their walking legs and use them to rake sediment, the way you drag your fingers through grass to flush crickets. A Eurypterid can spend an afternoon moving in slow motion, harvesting the floor for small invertebrates that never imagined they could be gathered like wheat. It's almost pastoral if you ignore the armour, the eyes, and the occasional decision to moonlight as a thug. Every so often the waterline pulls back and something remarkable happens. Footprints. Not yours, you'd be wise to keep those to yourself, but theirs. Great spreading sequences of paired prints with a central drag, a record of paddles used as legs, of spines stabbing into damp sand, of a telson scrawling a faint groove behind. These are palmicnium tracks, the signature of a Eurypterid walking out of the shallows and across a tidal flat, perhaps to molt in peace, perhaps to deposit eggs, perhaps because the lagoon suddenly decided to be land, and someone hadn't gotten the memo. Horseshoe crabs still do a version of this. Moonlit pilgrimages into the surf, ancient rituals performed under modern constellations. The Eurypterid version is heavier, riskier, and when it goes wrong it fossilizes beautifully. A stride that stumbles, a scuff that ends midline, a body imprint where the armour settled. You can stand over a slab and read panic in stone. Their rise coincides with yours, but not yet. Early fishes, some jawless and armoured, some experimenting with real speed. For a while, the seas and freshwaters run a weird mixed league. A helmeted, heterostraken, jawless fish sulks along the bottom like a misplaced doorstop. A pterygotid swoops and says, "This is mine now." But time is not sentimental. By the late Devonian, fishes discover jaw mechanics worth poetry, tales worthy of verbs, and a level of agility that makes paddles look quaint. Sharks get weird in a productive way. Bony fishes learn to be knives. Eurypterids don't vanish in a single dramatic exit. They fade. They specialise, they get pushed to edges. The brackish, the marginal, the places with more salt than dignity. Some last into the Permian, which is a long way to run on the original plan. Up close, the armour is a biography. Growth lines arc across the plates like tree rings written by a blacksmith. Muscle scars dot the inner surfaces, attachments for the machinery that powered the stroke of paddle, the snap of a claw. The exoskeleton is layered like laminar glass, chitin reinforced with minerals. Under the right conditions it shimmers with the ghost of original cuticle. In very rare specimens, soft tissues whisper, outlines of book gills tucked under the abdomen, delicate as paper fans, traces of the gut, threads of the digestive saker where meals were filed and processed. You learn that inside the tank there was patience, plumbing, and a quiet logic. What makes them unsettling isn't just size, it's composure. Fish often look startled by their own existence. Eurypterids look like they read the manual. They don't quiver. They don't telegraph. They simply arrive with a low push of water and a confirmation of intent. The compound eyes tick a little as they scan, each facet sending its pixel of the world to a brain that, for its era, is uncomfortably good at this. They pivot with a flick of the telson, lower their body until the belly plates skim the silt, and become a shadow that owns its outline. Some of them bristle with spines and gothic crenellations, but others are slick, understated, the colour of wet stone. You can pass your hand ill-advised above the carapace and feel the boundary layer cling, water sticking to shape slicing quiet. If Terra had a brand-style guide, matte, low-gloss practical would be in there in a big friendly font, you might want to ask what they feared. The answer is boring and therefore true. Bigger ones, each other, fluctuations in salinity, a sudden lack of oxygen when the lagoon sulks and stratifies. They feared the same thing everything does, the rules changing faster than your body can. When extinctions pulse through the Paleozoic, when coastlines redraw themselves, when competitors learn new tactics, the sea scorpions do not petition. They try a new bay. They molt one more time. They leave another suit behind on a slab of dolostone that will someday be hoisted into sunlight and stared at by a mammal with questions. If you could follow one for a day, you'd watch it write lines across a living map, from the sponge-fringed mouths of tidal creeks to the crinoid gardens and back again. Past brachiopod quilts and worm burrows, over trilobites that have learned humility. You would see it pause under the shadow of a reef, lift slightly and hold itself there perfectly, the shell angles and limb positions conspiring to neutral buoyancy, like an equation performed. Then, without hurry, it would slide forward, paddles sweeping once, twice, and you'd lose it in the brown-green distance where light gets tired. The sea keeps prototypes. Most go nowhere. This one didn't just work. It set a tone. Arm yourself. Rid the water. own the shallows. Long after the last Eurypterids sank, that doctrine remained. Every mangrove channel, every estuary at dusk, every river mouth where salt and fresher argue, there's an echo of broad paddles, heavy armour, and compound eyes deciding. If your legs feel suddenly too bare standing here, good. The past has reached up from the mud and tapped you on the ankle to say very politely that you are in somebody else's hallway. The Devonian comes on like a warm, shallow dream, sunlit carbonate platforms, reefs built from sponges and corals, shoals of armoured fish glittering like a parade of kitchenware. It is called the Age of Fishes, which is adorable, because it implies variety and opportunity, and not the looming arrival of a single thesis. Bite first, audit later. Out beyond the reef line, the water goes a little green and heavy. Something moves there with the certainty of a closing door. You don't see teeth, because there aren't any. There are blades. The mouth is a ring of sharpened bone plates, upper and lower, honed against each other by use, so that each feed becomes maintenance. Self-sharpening guillotines, the ocean's most violent pencil sharpener. The head is a castle. Layered dermal armour, plates stitched together with sutures, eye sockets sunk behind bony brows, everything forward of the pectoral region engineered like a battering ram that graduated summa cum laude. The back half, ghostly. Cartilage and softer tissues don't fossilise well out here, so our monster is preserved like a punchline, spectacular face rumours for a tale. Artists apply the rest, the rock refuses to comment. The animal rolls its head slightly, and the water around the jaw unthreads into suction. That's the first trick, a neck joint unique to its kind. These are placoderms, the armoured fish overlords, where the head shield lifts away from the thoracic shield. Open wide fast enough and the low pressure in front of the mouth slurps prey forward like a spilled secret. Then the second trick, a closing power stroke that arrives with the moral clarity of a dropped anvil. Plates meet plates. Anything in between is converted from noun to paste. Bite forces. Paleontologists argue and run models and write careful numbers, but the summary is simple. If you had a shell, it did not count. Meet the thing that makes other apex predators update their resumes. A Dunkleosteus, likely D. Torelli if we're haunting the black shales of what will someday be Ohio. 6 to maybe 8 meters depending on the specimen, your tolerance for scientific optimism. A head like an ancient door. You don't open it, it opens you. The eyes peer through slit-like notches, and somewhere behind them the jaw muscles spool like winches. The whole front half is a promise, and the promise is that armour is delicious. Watch it hunt along the edge of a stromatoporoid reef, those old sponge fortresses stacked into palaces, their courtyards teeming with little dramas. A cloud of small placoderms flickers in panic, scales flashing. An early shark, slender, swift, all cartilage and confidence, cuts across the scene like a drawn line. You reflexively nominate the shark as protagonist because your brain has watched too many modern documentaries. But this is the Devonian, and the shark is background. The real plot device is the armoured silhouette that does not hurry because it controls the punctuation. A soundless in her, the head tilts, the jointed skull yaws upward a hair, and the water in front of the plates tumbles inward as if gravity misfired. The shark blinks. Does it have eyelids? Who cares? And finds itself one body length closer to a problem. Then, snap. Not delicate, not surgical, just certainty. The bone blades meet, the water shudders, a mist of stolen scales torpedoes outward and winks into the green. The bite leaves signatures, fossils carry them, gouges in rival armour, plates that healed and then got rebitten. Coprolites, polite word for poop, packed with powdered bone like a calcium smoothie, regurgitated pellets, too armoured and spat out mid-meal. The predator's mouth didn't just shear, it overwhelmed. You can draw a flowchart from the plate's wear patterns, grab, crush, reposition, finish, like a workshop on efficient disassembly with a live audience. The prey list reads like a roll call of ambition. Ammonoids, spiraled cousins of the earlier straight-shelled killers, drift in coiled elegance and discover that spirals don't stop scissor jaws. Smaller placoderms such as Bothria lepis scuttle over the bottom in armoured, hunched humility and nevertheless end up as debris. Early sharks with names that sound like knife brands, Cladocylachy, Sthethacanthus, learn the fate of speed against leverage. Even other Dunkleosteus are not off the table. Apex status includes cannibalism by default. When you industrialize bite, everything becomes inventory. Move in and look at the engineering. The skull roof and cheek plates interlock like a vaulted ceiling, spreading forces so that the jaws can go full guillotine without the head exploding from its own enthusiasm. The lower jaw's leading edge is beveled where it meets the upper. Two chisels arguing and the argument is a cut. The opening mechanism is all linkages. When the lower jaw drops, it yanks on the head shield via tendons and bone levers, prying the whole front end wider in a domino of motion. Open super fast, then crash shut. Suction plus scissors. A combo move. Whales will later do baleen poetry. Crocodiles will do hinge and hold philosophy. Dunkleosteus does come here / now leave. If you want elegance, the body plan offers its own minimalist charm. The armour stops at the chest too abruptly to be fashion. It's weight where it matters, and nothing extra where drag would punish. The pectoral region seems built for control, stability to aim the mouth like a weapon sight. Reconstruction sketches give it a swept tail and a torpedo trunk, because physics likes those and the rest of the placoderm clan suggests it, but the rock still hugs its secrets. This uncertainty adds to the menace. Fear of the known, head married to fear of the unknown, everything else. The seascape around it evolves rules in response. Coral gardens complicate into labyrinths, narrow alleys where a big armoured face can't pivot easily. Some fishes choose speed as theology and get sleeker. Others choose spines, ridges, clunky body armour, all expensive strategies with mixed reports. If you're an ammonoid designer, you workshop shelf thickness and ornamentation like it's a startup pitch. Does ribbing help? Maybe until it doesn't. Do you go small and numerous or big and cocky? Roll the geologic dice and find out. Meanwhile, the chemistry of the world is quietly mutinous. The late Devonian flirts with low oxygen episodes, wide anoxic belts blooming in deeper basins, turning calm seas into quiet crime scenes. Black shales accumulate like stacked warnings. Reefs stutter. The base of the food web gets complicated. It turns out being king of murder doesn't protect you from someone unplugging the planet's air pump. Apex predators are cliffs, impressive and brittle when the sea level changes. Stalk this hunter into the gloom and you notice it doesn't glow or shimmer or posture. It arranges, a slow cant of the head to read the angle of a fin flare in the near dark. A single pump of the pectorals to slide laterally, keeping the quarry centred in the mental geometry. Then the blink-fast deploy of the mouth, a theatre curtain whipping open and slamming shut in the same motion. If vision fails, it listens to pressure and chaos, to the way disturbed water writes colophones along scales and shell. If the first cut doesn't finish the job, a second one lands before you've translated shock into motion. Occasionally, the monster loses. There are fossils that imply struggles that didn't break right, damaged plates that never healed, bones with parasitic gnaw marks, jaw edges rounded where a life of violence did its slow work. Nobody gets out of the Devonian without a critique from geology. Storms smash reefs into versions of gravel. A sand wave buries a feeding ground overnight. The oxygen line moves downslope and suddenly the comfortable hunting depth is a sickness. You can be a perfect machine for a moment, queen of a niche, and then the moment turns into paperwork filed under extinction debt. Yet while it reigns, it programs the neighbourhood psychology. Schooling fishes begin to school, not just travel together, but behave like a multi-body algorithm designed to dodge suction cones. Sharks refine speed and manoeuvrability, slipping into roles where being punched by water is better than being gripped by bone. Even the invertebrates write subroutines. Tougher shells, trickier coiling, a life cycle that gets the babies away from the worst mouths. Dunkleosteus is not just a mouth, it's a syllabus. Everything around it learns. Don't be here, don't be soft, don't be obvious. In the shallowest lagoons, juveniles, scaled down, headaches with training wheels armour, patrol in cautious arcs, practicing the open-close routine on anything that fits. You see the future stutter there, little guillotines testing the hinge, learning what angles produce what sounds, discovering that some praise shatter, some squish, some gum up the works, and need to be spat out in a graceless cough. The act of learning is loud in the water, bone on bone is not subtle, and the reef pauses to take attendance afterward. If you could run your hand along the fossil skull, don't, museum stuff hate that, you'd feel the plan written in texture. Grooves for blood vessels and nerves mapped like a transit diagram. Muscle attachment scars pitted and rough where power rooted itself. The cutting edges polished by a lifetime of crime. The inside tells a softer story, where the palate met the brain case, where the joint rolled, where the sensory canals of the lateral line etched faint threads to the outside world, allowing the fish to read vibrations like rumour. The whole thing is less a head than a fortress with a listening problem. And then, the part nobody loves. The age of fishes ends badly. Waves of extinction roll through the late Devonian. The Kelwasser pulses and the final Hangenberg slap down, kneecapping reefs, retooling oceans, ripping up the invitations. Placoderms, the armoured aristocracy, fade out with a geologic sigh. The big guillotines stop clicking. Their empire doesn't crash so much as unplug. Hallway lights going black one by one. Sharks and bony fishes inherit the room, and because they paid attention, they arrive sharper, faster, more various. The rules remain. Open fast, bite hard, waste nothing. The king is gone, the throne becomes a process. But here, in the thick water of a Devonian evening that will never come again, the monster is still real and busy. The reef's edge is striped with shadow. A school of little armoured optimists makes a tactical error. The head lifts, pressure drops, plates meet with a final decisive kiss. Somewhere a future mammal's hands will cradle a slab of shale and trace the edge where this happened, eyes doing their first honest work of awe and dread. You don't need imagination. The rock remembers. The guillotine never needed teeth. The Permian Ocean looks innocent from the surface. Flat light, slow swells, a horizon that pretends to be patient. Then you go under and realise the world has been reorganised. Reefs are not lovely coral cathedrals yet. They're sponge fortresses, with briozoan brickwork and tabulate and rugose holdovers stubbornly hanging on. Crinoids lift their feathery crowns into the current like aristocrats at an opera. Ammonoids drift in coils, their chambers tuned to buoyancy like pipe organs. Placoderms are gone, the guillotines have left the building. Sharks and their odd cousins take the lease and immediately start redecorating, by which I mean they attack the concept of jaw as if it were a design prompt. You feel it before you see it, a hush in the water, the tiniest pressure curl approaching in tidy pulses. Then a long silhouette glides out of the haze, sleek cartilage skeleton hidden, big eyes reading the dim, a mouth that is wrong. It opens and in the gap you don't see rows of independent teeth. You see a spiral, a literal buzzsaw of teeth coiled like a rolled up tape measure, nested at the midline of the lower jaw, each tooth larger than the one before because life keeps adding new ones at the back and pushing the old ones forward to the cutting edge. This is Helicoprion, the ocean's most audacious answer to the question, what if dentistry went centrifugal? For a century, people guessed where to put that spiral because cartilage doesn't fossilize and nature didn't bother labeling parts. On the nose, on the tail, a dorsal ornament. Cute theories, gracefully wrong, the right answer. The whirl sits in the lower jaw like a conveyor of knives. Each time the mouth closes, the spiral rolls prey inward and down, teeth meeting soft flesh with the confident glide of a chef's mandolin. There are no upper teeth to match, just cartilage, and likely a hardened palate to oppose the cut, so Helicoprion solves chewing the way a paper shredder solves filing. It turns whole into manageable. Watch it stalk a cloud of soft-bodied cephalopods, squid-like things without shells, all vulnerability and attitude. The fish angles upward a hair, mouth closed, reading currents with its lateral line. Then the jaw drops, and in that instant a negative pressure wave kisses the target forward. The mouth snaps and the whirl engages, outer teeth, the newest, biggest blades seizing, older teeth deeper in the spiral drawing the body inward, slicing with a rolling motion that doubles as transport. There's no dramatic headshake, just a tidy zzz of meat becoming geometry. You look for tooth wear to prove the story, and the fossils oblige, but only where it matters, not on some imaginary protruding saw that rams prey like cavalry, but along the functional arc where the whirl tracks against the palate. The outermost teeth often look suspiciously pristine, because the cutting action happens as the prey is rolled inward, across multiple crowns. It's a subtle horror, one long, continuous blade that is always brand new somewhere. The whirl itself is a diary. Teeth are stacked like a spiral staircase. Each step is a moment the fish upgraded its equipment. The oldest teeth sit deep in the coil like childhood photos, the youngest gleam at the rim, bigger because the animal was bigger when it made them. If you want to age a buzzsaw shark, you literally count the spiral. The record is absurdly personal. Growth spurts etched in enamel, famine pauses, bursts of abundance where the new teeth come in like a brag. Prey selection is a lesson in realism. Could it crush an ammonoid? You'd like that scene, shell bits snowing down, the whirl victorious, but physics rolls its eyes. The tool is optimized for soft to medium soft. Squid, fish, anything that yields to a slice and pulls through. Crunching armoured spirals is a job for someone with plates and patience. Helicoprion is not a crusher. It's a ribbon maker. It turns whole animals into neat, swallowable strips with the time and efficiency of an insult. You might be tempted to call it a shark and move on, and the Permian will let you, politely, while clearing its throat. Helicoprion and its cousins belong to a weirder branch of cartilaginous fishes, eugeneodonts, more closely kin to today's ratfish than to your standard TV shark. They share the cartilage economy, the electrosensing face, the fast twitch propulsion, but their dental creativity lives in a different tax bracket. The upper jaw may be more fused to the skull, the palatal surfaces more plate-like. The mouth is a workshop with bespoke tooling. If modern sharks are box cutters, this is a specialized industrial blade with a manual you will not read. The Permian doesn't stop at one experiment. A few strata away you meet Adestus, the scissor-tooth terror, whose jaws carry opposing tooth blades that project forward top and bottom, meeting in a strike that looks less like a bite and more like a vertical chop. New teeth add at the back, old teeth march forward and out, forming a grotesque pair of shears that never close fully because nature sometimes prioritizes theatre. Imagine a fish that edits prey by red line. Strike down, pull back, repeat, and whatever you grabbed now comes in versions. Elsewhere, earlier oddballs leave their fingerprints on the era's mood. Stethocanthus, more carboniferous than Permian, but its reputation refuses to die, sports an anvil-shaped dorsal pad covered in tooth-like denticles, a brushy platform, possibly for display, species ID, or romance rituals best left undescribed. The dorsal spine in front of that pad points forward like a warning label in 3D. Males carry the hardware bigger, which is biology's coy way of saying, this is about courtship and power, probably both. You can almost hear the water cooler gossip. Nice ironing board, champ. In murky freshwater channels, an eel-bodied xenacanthid cruises, long dorsal fin running down its back like a ribbon of intent, a backward point in spine jutting from the skull. Some have speculated about a venom gland. Others shrug and point out that a head spike is already a pretty good conversation ender. Xenacanthus doesn't care which headline you prefer. It's a patient ambush with a low pulse, proof that even inland backwaters are running the same evolutionary software. Innovate the mouth, armour the message, haunt the places where visibility is an opinion. The common thread is that Paleozoic sharks are not one thing. They are a factory floor of prototypes. Mouths hinge in strange arcs, teeth fuse into tools, fins bristle with statements. Nature tries everything and throws out nothing until a mass extinction does the housekeeping. The result is an ocean where you, as prey, are not just hunted, you are processed. Follow Helicoprion on a night shift. The Permian shelf slopes down into cooler green. The fish hold station with tiny tail beats, pectoral fins trimming pitch. Ahead, a shimmering school of small actinopterygians flashes and recalibrates like coins training to be birds. Helicoprion approaches from below, dark body in darker water. It doesn't aim for the centre. It nicks the edge, mouth yawning in a quick oval. The whirl hums through the nearest fish and catches a second by proximity, rolling it inward. The school pinwheels classic baitball panic, but their algorithm doesn't cover meat slicer. Another pass, another pair of edits. There's no splatter, no dramatic bite silhouette, just fish suddenly shorter than they started. If you could turn the animal transparent, you'd watch the mechanics tick. The lower jaw swings up, the whirl presses against the upper palate, the spiral rotates not freely, but along a guided track, each tooth engaging in order. A rack and pinion of flesh. Ligaments transmit forces in tidy vectors. Muscles along Meckel's cartilage bulge then sleek. It's elegant like a sewing machine and merciless for precisely that reason. The ocean around it responds with counter-inventions that range from reasonable to desperate. Some small fishes get faster starts and shorter bodies, less leverage for a slicer to grab. Cephalopods change their routines, going deeper by day, shallower by night, tightening their schooling, learning that a fast jet in any direction is still better than one in a predictable direction. Even ammonoids, not the main target, get thicker ornamentation as if the rumour of cutting blades elsewhere in the water has reached their design committee. The Red Queen doesn't care if Threat A doesn't hunt you. Adapting to Threat A might still help with Threat B. Paranoia is a survival trait here. Now and then the buzzsaw shark runs into its own edge cases. A too large fish turns in the mouth and wedges, and the jaw must cycle again and again, the whirl planing the body down like a lathe until physics reopens the conversation. A squid wraps arms around the snout and jets, and for a second Helicoprion is a banner with ballast before the next cut frees the flag. These are tiny embarrassments, the kind only a perfect tool experiences because it refuses to carry backup gear. You'll find them in rocks far from today's sea, because the Permian didn't care about your future continental codes. Worlds turn up in the Urals, in China, scattered across what will someday be the American West. Idaho, of all places, will claim Helicoprion as a state fossil, an inland love letter to a time when that land was a shelf edge and the night belonged to a rolling blade. Pick up a good specimen and you can trace the animal's biography with your thumb, the spiral tightening toward youth, loosening into power, each tooth a page in a book bound in enamel and audacity. Around the periphery of this world, the planet starts to cough. Volcanic provinces light up, Siberia doesn't just simmer, it tantrums, CO2 climbs, oceans struggle to breathe, and the chemistry that keeps reefs polite begins to sulk. The deep goes anoxic in wide, ugly swathes. Food webs snag and tear, none of this is personal. It's just the kind of routine apocalypse Earth files every few 100 million years. Innovation meets atmosphere and atmosphere wins. But hold the frame for one more minute. Warm water, twilight green, the silver confetti of frightened fish, and the quick dark arc of a jaw that doesn't chomp so much as edit reality. The Permian didn't just keep the Cambrian's promise of bite, it got creative. It built a mouth that smiles in spirals and means it. Even after the lights go out, that idea echoes. Somewhere in you, lodged like a memory from a life you never lived, is the certainty that the ocean once solved a problem by inventing a buzzsaw, and that for a while, it worked beautifully. When the lights come back on after the worst die-off in Earth's history, the ocean looks like a crime scene that hired a cleaning crew and told them to be optimistic. Panthalassa spreads like a single endless mirror. The Tethys Seaway is a warm ribbon stitched through the continents. Reefs grope their way back from microbial mats and shell graveyards. The rules have been reset, and the ocean has a blank line where it asks, name of new apex. Evolution doesn't hesitate. It writes, ichthyosaur. The first ones are awkward rockets, long, eelish bodies with paddles that look experimentally attached, a tail that hasn't yet decided to be a crescent. They move with a serpentine flex, side to side like a memory of lizards. Give them a few million years and the silhouette sharpens. Spines shorten, vertebrae multiply into a spring, the tail bends downward at the tip like a hinge for speed. A proper lunate fin grows, upper lobe fleshy, lower lobe riding the bent backbone like a skeg. What began as a reptile trying on the ocean becomes an animal designed by hydrodynamics. A living equation. The eyes are the first thing that tell you they're serious. Huge, fortified with sclerotic rings, bony donuts inside the orbit to resist pressure and keep the lens aligned when depth tries to squish truth into soup. These eyes aren't for admiring sunsets, they're for reading darkness like fine print. A school of fish thinks night will save it. The ichthyosaur writes no in sonorless silence and arrives anyway. Your tour guide tonight is not the largest you'll meet, just the most honest. It hangs in the mid-water column like a torpedo with opinions, counter-shading dark up, pale down, the camouflage of things that always mean it. In profile, the skull is a spear, long rostrum bristling with conical teeth that don't shear so much as impale, hold and swallow Torulo in a tidy conveyor of doom. The paddles, forefins broader than the hind, phalanges stacked like a deck of cards, stiffen into hydrofoils when speed matters and turn to rudders when the hunt tightens into geometry. The backbone reads like an accountant's ledger, hundreds of spool-shaped vertebrae, amphicoelous discs that flex without complaint. Every joint is a yes. It breathes air, of course, because this is still a reptile under the hood, just one that learned to surf atmosphere and water without ever touching land again. It has no time for beaches, it carries its babies inside. If you want proof the rock kept it, a Triassic mother from China, Chaohusaurus, frozen mid-birth with a pup halfway out, head first, the old terrestrial way, because even evolution needs a few tries before switching to tail first so the newborn doesn't drown. In the Alps, a long-snouted Basanosaurus preserved with a tangle of embryos inside, an entire nursery in transit. There's no tender music in this, it's logistics. Live birth means you never have to park your empire on a shoreline and beg gravity for mercy. Now tilt into the early Triassic, the ocean still haunted, the food web rattly, and watch a giant arrive too early to be polite. In Nevada's future desert, an ichthyosaur the length of a bus cruises an inland sea. Call it Simbaspondylus, call it Simbaspondylus jungorum if you like labels, the point is size. Barely out of the Permian shadow and the ocean is already manufacturing submarines. The head is long and unblinking, the jaw opens on a world that fits. Stomach contents from its kin suggest a diet not restricted by last names. Fish, cephalopods, smaller marine reptiles, whatever came in a size that could be regretted. And then there's the one that makes the water hold its breath. Thalatoarchon saraphagis, the lizard-eating ruler of the sea, because sometimes science lets the name wear leather. 8-9 meters of U2, teeth like chisels, tall and laterally compressed, built not for squid or polite little fish, but for biting into something with ribs. Macropredation, apex on apex. Imagine another marine reptile, substantial and complacent, skimming the slope above a sponge meadow. The water around its flank tightens. You can feel the pressure gauntlet of an incoming body at speed. Then the strike, a lateral hit, jaws locking around bone, a twist that turns anatomy into leverage. No chewing, just a break, a reposition, the kind of swallow that ends arguments. They don't do this with frenzy, they do it with accounting. The big ichthyosaurs, Shonisaurus and its even more scandalous cousin Shonisaurus sicaniensis later in the Triassic, go long and huge, ribs like ladders, skulls an exercise in long-distance appetite. Some species all but erase their teeth as adults, perhaps trading stabbing for suction, turning prey into vacuumable data. Others keep their hardware and their attitude. Guilds bloom. Spear-snouted fish-eaters, squid specialists with smooth conical dentition. Possible suction monsters whose throats are an instruction manual in physics. When a niche opens, an ichthyosaur moves in and starts rearranging the furniture. Follow them across the map of a world you wouldn't recognise. In the Tethys near what will become Italy and Switzerland, Monte San Giorgio's future limestone stacks layer thin sheets of time, quiet basins where carcasses settled intact, paddles splayed, embryos still in place, skin sometimes shadowed as a dark film. Here Mixosaurus schools like sleek little knives and bigger forms glide the drop-offs, eyes calculating the economy of a slope. On a carbonate platform that will become China's Guizhou province, the Panxian fauna floats in warm clarity, and an ichthyosaur drifts overhead like a rumour you can measure. Over what will be Nevada, an entire hillside becomes a mass death of Shonisaurus, skeletons jumbled by currents and time, an ossuary of giants that proves the Triassic learned how to build whales out of reptiles long before whales existed. If you want to understand their speed, watch the tail. That kink near the end of the vertebral column isn't a flaw, it's a hinge that anchors a crescent fin. The lower lobe, stiffened by bone, hammers water. The upper, fleshy and following, smooths the vortex street into a road. In early forms, the caudal fin is a half-hearted paddle. In later ones it becomes a scythe. Body shape follows, from eel to tuna, from memory to machine. They graduate from undulating most of the body to throwing power out of the tailstock, reducing drag, saving oxygen, turning muscle into distance with the kind of efficiency that makes prey organisms reconsider their life choices. They read the world with their faces. A lateral line may not leave much in bone, but the canals etched in the skull, tiny grooves that once held nerves and vessels, hint at a reptile that could feel a fish's panic as pressure poetry. The sclerotic rings don't just armour the eye, they lock focus against the crush, a tripod for seeing. In deeper water, where the green goes to blue and then to salmon, a big ichthyosaur angles its snout upward and waits for silhouettes above. Light from the surface breaks into coins on its back. Down here, that glitter is a baited hook, and the ichthyosaur is a professional problem. If you're hoping for a gentle herbivore cameo, wrong era, wrong planet. Triassic seas are a restart with hunger in charge. Still, the monsters have their vulnerabilities and they file them neatly. Surface to breathe, and you risk a nothosaur ambush in the shallows, long-necked, crocodile-snouted cousins lounging like bad habits. Linger over continental shelves, and a storm turns your hunting ground into a cement mixer. Chase too deep, and oxygen asks questions your blood cannot answer forever. Teeth break, jaws miscalculate. A hunted reptile skews sideways at the last second. Bones meet bones in the wrong math. Both animals pinwheel into the gloom, leaving a cloud of ivory splinters to record how close Apex can live to mistake. Look closely at the paddles laid out in limestone. Digits multiplied far beyond 5, a bloom of phalanges in each finger, hyperphalange, turning hands into fans. In some species, the elements are packed and short, a broad, stiff blade. In others, they are long and numerous, a more flexible oar. The girdles, the shoulder and pelvic assemblies, tell you who did the steering and who was along for the ride. Forefins big and decisive, hind fins shrinking into auxiliary control. The spine's neural spines change height along the back, a rise over the midsection where swimming muscles anchor like ropes to a mast. This is what it looks like when a land lineage becomes a submersible and then forgets it was ever anything else. They leave stories in their bellies. In one slab, tight coils of ammonoid shells sit crushed together, breakfast compacted by a reptile that solved hard problems with swift snouts and patient stomach acid. In another, fish scales glitter in a heap like spilled sequins. Tooth crowns chip and regrow at the edges, enamel polished by the daily friction of too much confidence. Even their feces, jet black coprolites, read like menus, flecked with bone dust, beak for fragments, and the occasional echo of something that fought back. If you want the dark flourish, come closer. Middle Triassic, Tethys margin, late afternoon. A small marine reptile, call it a placodont shaped like a smug turtle with bad priorities, works over a patch of shellfish, cracking, grinding, not looking up. The water plucks at your ears, the faint tremolo of a body aligning with intent. From beneath, a shadow pulls thin and ascends. No splash, no performance. The ichthyosaur hits at an angle designed by geometry and malice. Teeth close around the midsection. The placodont's armour is a suggestion. A shake, not the chaotic thrash of crocodile, but a precise roll, and ligaments become paperwork. Half the animal disappears in one swallow, the other half pinwheels, suddenly nobody's problem. The ichthyosaur does not celebrate. It adjusts trim, inhales evening air, and writes another line in the ledger. Do not mistake them for isolated tyrants, they're an economy. Juveniles hunt the shallows for small fish and soft cephalopods, their rostra proportionally shorter, their paddles overlarge, puppy feet fitted to a missile. Mid-sizers work the slope, a conveyor between abundance and depth. The titans roam the blue deserts between landmasses, where being huge is a strategy for surviving emptiness by carrying your own momentum forward into the future. Sometimes they vanish from a region's rock record for 1,000,000 years, and then return redesigned, as if the ocean took them into a back room and upgraded the firmware. They are not forever. Nothing is. By the end of the Triassic, the cast will change. New reptiles with flippers and long necks will try a different recipe. Crockin will test the shoreline. Later, much later, the mosasaurs will turn lizards into torpedoes with attitudes. But the first predators to stitch the world ocean back together after the Permian's blackout are these cold-blooded, warm-moving enigmas with eyes like floodlights and spines that learn to fly through water. Stand on a Triassic shore. Any shore, they all belong to the same ocean, and the surface tells you nothing. The real story is down a few breaths, where a reptile shaped like a thought cuts past, silent as a doctrine writing the new laws in wake and bone. The Jurassic Sea is green glass from above, and a cathedral of appetite below. Europe is mostly water at this point. Broad, warm shelves and inland seas stitched together by the Oxford clay, the Kimmeridge clay, all those civilized names hiding the fact that this place is a food processor. Ammonites drift like baroque wristwatches that forgot the time. Belemnites jet around as angry pencils. Ichthyosaurs still slice the mid-water with their flashlight eyes. And then the light dims behind you, not because a cloud passed, but because geometry did. Something big, short-necked, and extremely sure of itself just took the lane. It wears 4 wings instead of legs, proper hydrofoils, not flappy afterthoughts. Each flipper is a blade of bone wrapped in muscle, trailing a thin turbulence that unrolls behind it like silk. The skull is a battleship's prow, long jaws lined with conical teeth that fit together as neatly as bad intentions. This is a pliosaur, one of the short-necked dragon knives. Leopleurodon, Pliosaurus, Pelonistes, names that sound like lawsuits, and it swims with the composure of a predator that invented yes. Sharks are the scariest, someone from the future will say, and the Jurassic will politely laugh. The pliosaur's tail is a punctuation mark, small and smug, because the sentence is written with flippers. It doesn't wriggle, it flies, underwater flight with fore and hind wings beating in phased strokes so efficient the water hardly has time to complain. When it wants to accelerate, both fore flippers notch down and shove. When it turns, the rear pair scissor a fraction and the entire animal pivots around its own hunger. The head is the point, literally. The snout narrows into a spear to part the water. Behind it, the jaws widen into leverage. The teeth are not serrated, they don't need to be. They're sockets of certainty, conical, sometimes striated, built to grip wet, panicking nouns and keep them noun-shaped until the skull decides otherwise. In some species, the teeth are the length of your hand and ribbed like cathedral columns set too close together. Close your eyes and you can hear them meet with a ceramic click inside your skull. It reads you with more than sight. Canals pit the bones of the snout, traces of the sensory web that once fed nerves with pressure, vibration, whispers of motion. A shoal of fish is not a colour, it's a geometry. An ichthyosaur's last-second twitch is not luck. It's a waveform, predictable if your brain evolved under a mortgage with the principle labelled starvation. Trace the coastlines that won't exist yet, Dorset's future cliffs, Normandy's future farms, the Alps as future limestone bookends. Down here they're all one story. In the Oxford clay basin, belemnite hooks pile up in fossil vomit mounds, regurgitolites, because even the boldest jaw draws a line at choking on barbied calami. Coprolites glitter with ground bone and belemnite beaks, plesiosaur paperwork signed and filed. On some ichthyosaur ribs, tooth gouges arc in patterns that healed and then got rebitten. Apex isn't a crown, it's a habit you have to renew. And then the sea opens and the mood changes because a wall of living mesh is moving through the light. No teeth on display, no attitude, just a mouth that opens like a hangar door and a head fringed with combs, gill rakers so fine they turn zooplankton into soup. Leedsichthys problematicus. The problematic is Victorian for "this fossil is being very annoying," slides past. Longer than buses will be, a pachycormid fish whose best defence is to be too big for the audition. The skeleton is strange, more cartilage than bone, so the fossil record keeps it like a rumour, but the math shows in the fragments, plates of skull as thin as china, gill arches that must have held a cathedral of filters, vertebrae like coasters. Estimates get argued in papers and pubs. The exact meter count is less important than the vibe. A whale shark-sized vacuum cleaner that evolved before whales thought to have bones. Watch it feed. The jaws ease apart and the head becomes a funnel. The rakers comb the water, each filament a passport officer stamping plankton into the afterlife. The fish cruises with the serene pace of something that by necessity must travel the buffet line all day. It is not harmless. It is simply not interested in murder, which, in this neighbourhood, is the same thing as being haunted. Juveniles do not get this dignity. A half-grown lead Zichthys glides in the wake of its parent a little too far to the side, and a shadow thickens beneath. The plesiosaur has been following the plankton slick too. Predators hunt prey. Apex hunters also hunt places where prey has to show up. It rises at an angle, 4 flippers cutting the water with the low-frequency thrum you feel in your chest. The snout breaks into the juvenile's periphery, and by the time a thought forms, the teeth are already inside it. There is no shake. Shaking costs energy and attracts attention. There is a clamp and a slight roll, a twist that turns ribs into a suggestion, and the body halves with a politeness so cruel that the surface barely wrinkles. If you're rooting for justice, the ocean respects your enthusiasm and continues with its programming. Around the hunters and the hoovers, the supporting cast is busy. Long-necked plesiosaurs, Cryptoclidus, Myranosaurus, thread their way through belemnite weather, necks like oiled rope, heads small and precise, fishing in the spaces a pliosaur can't fit. Metriorhynchid sea crocodiles, Metriorhynchus dacosaurus, shoot through like living harpoons, skin smoothed for speed. Tails bearing a fluke because why not be aerodynamic in water? Hybodont sharks, with their odd dorsal spines and taste for everything, bounce along the edges like pickpockets with day jobs. Overhead, pterosaurs trace tight epicycles on the wind, dropping to clip fish near the surface, each splash a punctuation mark in a sentence you cannot read from here. The pliosaur writes its version of grammar with angles. It patrols along the thermocline where cool meets warm and sound bends. It quarters the slope where the shelf slides into blue and the silhouettes get honest. When it chooses to sprint, the water pays attention. 4 flippers beat down and back, hind flippers set to trim, and the skull becomes a wedge. Muscles knot along the shoulder girdle, through the chest shield, down the vertebral column. The entire animal becomes a single weaponized decision. Stomach contents, when the rock gets generous, are a mixtape of the neighborhood's mistakes. Ichthyosaur bones with the ends gnawed slick. Plesiosaur vertebrae. Fish scales stacked like snowfall. Belemnite guards by the handful because even apex predators swallow their pride with their calamari. One pliosaur jaw turns up with healed fractures. A testimony that sometimes the prey hit back or the hunter misjudged a turn and met the seabed with a little too much enthusiasm. Teeth snap, teeth regrow. You can see the replacement cues in cross-section, crowns waiting like bullets in a magazine. Meanwhile, the gentle giant keeps doing laps. Leedichthys doesn't have the luxury of sprint. Filter feeding is cardio married to accounting. It times its routes with the plankton cycles, cruises the edges of upwelling currents where cold, nutrient-rich water erupts with microscopic life. Its gill rakers, thousands of fine branching plates, sieve the soup. Blood washes past on the other side, skimming off calories like a bank fee. Juveniles shelter where the light is messy, over sponge gardens, around limestone knobs, anywhere a big shadow can't draw a straight line. They grow into their safety by surviving everything that wants an easy noon. You notice the small stuff because the big stuff insists on it. A rain of belemnite rostra marks a predator's last bad mouthful. Ammonite shells drift down in slow spinning funerals, scribed with bite marks that form U-shapes you could match to a tooth if you had the jaw in hand. On the seafloor, brittle stars swarm any scrap that reaches bottom, a dark flowing carpet of arms, while crabs you don't have names for yet practice the art of pretending to be rocks. Mussels colonize bones. Worm tubes thread through sediment to begin their lifetime of polite theft. The whole bottom is a business school for necrophages. Why does the pliosaur feel worse than a shark? Partly because it aims with its whole body. Sharks bend into curves, pliosaurs cut into planes. When it turns toward you, it's like a door swinging shut in the dark. The eyes sit a bit back from the snout, not huge like an ichthyosaur's floodlights, but honest. Forward enough to narrow the world into problems it can measure. You get the sense that it doesn't want you. It wants something of a certain size, density and angle, and if you match the parameters then congratulations, you're physics. Night in the Jurassic shallows looks like green ink. The plankton glow if you brush past, little explosions of bioluminescence logging trespass. A small plesiosaur skims the surface, snatching belemnites by the wake. Below, Leedsichthys turns with grave momentum, and its rakers shimmer as the light flecks catch. Farther out, the pliosaur becomes negative space. Absence outlined by firefly sparks as its flippers shear through living galaxies. It's not stalking the glow, it's stalking what the glow betrays. One hard beat, and the spark field collapses into a sudden dark wedge where the mouth was. Sometimes the story flips. A pliosaur cruises too close to the surface, misjudging the angle on a fish boil, and a pterosaur stabs down in a blur, lancing the water and ripping away with a squirming strip of something that matters. The reptile below snaps reflexively, jaws closing on air and stray foam. Apex predators are apex only between accidents. The scar on its snout later will heal into a pale stripe you could trace with your finger if time didn't object. The big filter feeder has its own enemies that are not teeth. Parasites nesting in the rakers, fouling the fine combs. Blooms that crash, turning rich lanes into deserts. Storms that flip the water column and send cold into heat and heat into places it shouldn't go. It's hard to be enormous on a budget that depends on microscopic optimism. It's harder when the neighbourhood writes with knives. Follow the pliosaur along a limestone escarpment and you'll watch it exploit architecture. It uses the cliff to box fish schools into right angles, drives them against the wall with a lazy half circle, then snaps through the densest arc like a scythe through a festival lineup. Gulls won't invent themselves for eons, but if they existed, they'd be yelling. The predator leaves a cloud of scales that tumble like glitter and are gone in minutes under the attention of small mouths and smaller agendas. You could spend a lifetime in the units, a few growth rings of teeth, just reading the wounds in the fossils. One plesiosaur cervical vertebra carries a puncture whose diameter matches a plesiosaur's front tooth. The edges are smoothed by healing, proof the victim swam away and learned a new caution that eventually fossilized with it. A chunk of pachycormid fin bears a semicircle bite, the arc uneven where the attacker hit a joint and slipped. An ammonite shell shows a neat U-bite that missed the body by millimeters and recorded the near-death as a permanent groove. The rock is petty like that. It remembers almost with better fidelity than the living do. There's humour here, but it's the kind where you laugh because you have gills made of nerves. Leedsichthys, the gentle giant, swims through the ruin of a belemnite battlefield with a face like a classroom globe. Its mouth opens, plankton goes in, and a tiny fish not paying attention ricochets from gill raker to raker and then back out through a gap, stunned and very educated. The pliosaur watches from below, eyes half-lidded, doing the math on angles, sizes, rewards, risks. Its stomach is not a story, it's a ledger. The ocean never hired a villain. It hired auditors. By late Jurassic afternoons, the water warms into tea and the visibility goes to gossip. That's when the big shapes get bolder. A pliosaur climbs from the slope into sunhaze, not because it needs light, but because its prey does. An ambush is a social contract. Leedsichthys crosses the bright zone with remoreless dignity, no hitchhikers in this era, and casts a kilometre-wide shadow of consequence. Between them, everything else lives in a corridor of maybes. You hold your breath without meaning to, not because you're afraid of drowning, but because the scene feels like it's counting. On 3, one of them moves. You already know which. The strike is a quiet catastrophe. The kind that never makes headlines because there aren't any newspapers yet, just limestone and the patient, unblinking memory of stone. The water is chalk milk and sun-warm, full of plankton glitter and drifting snow from a billion dead coccoliths. A continent has split itself into thirst and plenty. The western interior seaway breathing across North America, shallow shelves folding into deeper troughs where light goes from gossip to rumour. The midwater is a lane for missiles. Fish, birds that aren't birds yet, sharks that haven't learned humility, and something larger that moves like a decision you can't take back. It announces itself with absence. One moment there is space, the next there is a body taking that space personally. The skull is wedge and window, nostrils scooted back from the snout to keep the front end clean, jaws that open wider than feels polite, and teeth that curve just so, hooks set in living hinges. The forelimbs are paddles, fingers multiplied into stiff fans. The tail isn't a lazy lizard taper, but a proper fluke, bent backbone anchoring a crescent blade that writes speed into water with every sweep. Counter-shading paints the code, dark up, pale down, the uniform of animals that treat sunlight as a weapon. You don't get a good look at the tongue, you get a good look at the gape because it never stops being relevant. Call it a mosasaur and watch the neighbourhood recalibrate. This is not a crocodile, it's a lizard that quit land and came back with upgrades. The skull flexes in multiple places, intramandibular joints letting each half of the lower jaw swing outward, extra teeth marching along the palate, pterygoid teeth, like a second opinion. When the mouth closes, those internal hooks rake prey down the throat with the patient confidence of a conveyor belt. It doesn't chew, it translates alive into inward. There are styles. Tylosaurus carries a beefy snout, the bony rostrum a battering ram that doesn't ask. Mosasaurus is heavy-jawed, square-faced, a tyrant with the anchor chain teeth. Platecarpus is sleeker, more mid-water missile than battering ram. Prognathodon packs thick cones for crunching. Globidens have molars rounded like river stones. Shell crackers for turtles and armoured snacks. And because the Cretaceous has a sense of humour, Xenodens shows up in the phosphate seas of Morocco, with bread knife teeth set edge to edge, a cutting blade where a smile should be. Diversity isn't a virtue here. It's a shopping list. Points of reference drift through like problems waiting for solutions. A flock of Hesperornis, toothed, loon-bodied divers, porpoise along the surface, legs set so far back their lives are practically verbs. One dives, wings useless in air but scandalously effective under the skin of the sea, and a shadow detaches from the thermocline with the patience of a debt collector. The mosasaur angles its approach not from behind but below and ahead because good predators close the gap in time, not space. A bubble of negative pressure jumps out from that yawning mouth, a brief vacuum handshake, and the bird slides forward into mathematics. Teeth meet in an ellipse of certainty. The water around you remains perfectly calm except for a flick of tail that says next. The ocean keeps receipts. Ammonite shells haul them to the future like silver notebooks. You find U-shaped gouges pressed into nacre, where a jaw tested the engineering, scars that healed into livid ridges, shells with the rim bitten away cleanly, as if a can opener was learning improv. Some ammonites die unbitten, but tell on themselves anyway. Clusters of eggs laid in quiet water, a spent parent drifting down in a graceless spiral, its life reduced to architecture and arithmetic. The living ones are everywhere, coiled like perfect Nautilus knockoffs, or rebellious heteromorphs that bend the spiral into hooks, corkscrews and pretzels, baculites straight as a ruler, scaphites wearing their curve like a shrug, nipponites scribbling three-dimensional graffiti. They breathe with gas in their shell chambers, adjust their buoyancy with a siphuncle threaded through the wall, between rooms, and move by jet. Take water in, push it out, call it a plan. Around the mouth, a beak and a radula, the world's quietest rasp, negotiate dinner. They are jewellery with an agenda. Against that persistence swims a specialist with round teeth built like honest work. Globidens prowls a reef line made from sponges and rudest bivalves, hunting the crunchable. A turtle the size of a coffee table grinds algae off a block of limestone in the wrong zip code. Globidens slides over the top like a ceiling closing and clamps down with a carapace offers arithmetic. Crunch. The sound is a muffled cave-in. A second bite. A third, and the shell becomes problem-solving debris. The mosasaur does not hurry. A jaw adapted to break geology takes its time. You can map fear by the way schools move. Fish that know about sharks flee in columns and crescents, tight curves that waste the attacker's turn radius. Fish that know about mosasaurs jitter three-dimensionally because the vector can come from any axis and the mouth follows through like a thought. In cross-section, a school under mosasaur attention looks like a galaxy losing patience. Spirals collapsing, starlets skittering outward, then a sudden clean lane where something fast and committed just passed. Night edits the script, but not the plot. Bioluminescent plankton stipple the darkness with little alarm clocks, every fin flick a flare, every brushstroke a receipt. A small mosasaur, call it Pleopletcarpus, hunts the glow like a thief reading motion sensors. Up ahead, a tight constellation blooms and then skews. The lizard body becomes absence outlined in light. The water does that low, thrumming hush you feel in ribs more than ears. And there's a soft thock that isn't sound at all, just your mammal brain registering certainty at a distance. The western interior isn't the only theatre. Across the Tethys, the phosphate basins of what will be Morocco turn the late Cretaceous into a pageant of preservation. Layer after layer of greenish rock, blades and bones and shells braided together into a record too generous to be polite. You get prognathodon with stomach contents that read like theft, fish scales, turtle plates, sometimes other mosasaur bits because apex is also a mirror. You get Mosasaurus bogae with jaw joints that say open wider, with toothwear that says I do this a lot. You get ammonite shells with tidy semicircles removed, bite and set patterns that imply the beak was the prize, the rest a side effect. They breathe air, of course. That part never changes. A big Mosasaurus hoffmanni looms from below, peels to the surface and breaks it with no drama at all, just a broad quiet exhale that turns into a sip. The Nera sit high and back, set into the skull like skylights so the animal can stay low and invisible while cashing an oxygen check. Then down again into the green, where gravity loosens up and decisions get pointy. If you could peel the skin without being rude, you'd find scale patches like small overlapping diamonds, tiny keels giving the water something honest to hold. Some fossils keep that ghost of texture, impressions pressed into chalk and shale, evidence that the Cretaceous dressed its monsters in something closer to speed fabric than crocodile grunge. Inside, the vertebral column bends near the end, a kink that commits to that tail fluke in the future. Muscle blocks anchor along high neural spines like winches set at even intervals. This body is a motor with a mouth. Everything else is a support act. Their enemies are not cliches. Cretoxyrina, a lamniform shark with respectable opinions, takes opportunistic chunks from young mosasaurs and anything else with volume. Squalicorax, the crow shark, leaves ragged signatures on the drift. A Cretaceous sanitation worker with lunch breaks. A giant turtle like Archelon is not a snack to anyone sane, but the bite marks across some fossil shells read like debates that got physical. Plesiosaurs still thread the water column with long-necked patience, and sometimes patience meets physics in a bad intersection. There's no romance here, just collisions and invoices. Ammonites answer with architecture. Sutures, the seams where septa meet the outer shell, branch into filigree so elaborate it looks like ornamentation until you run the math on stress distribution. Those lacework lines are buttresses, writ in calcium carbonate, strength by fractal. Some species add ribs, spines, nodes, a hail of please reconsider. And some go small, betting everything on being too numerous to target with a mouth that swings for horsepower. Even so, you pick up a shell millions of years later, and your finger drops into a healed bite. The message is not that the ammonite survived, it's that survival looks like this. Sometimes the mosasaur misses. A strike clips the coil of baculites and the animal jets backward in a squeak of siphons, the hunter's teeth scraping a crescent of nacre with nothing in it. Sometimes the hunter overcommits and meets the shelf, a low-speed crunch that writes a hairline fracture across the snout which later heals into a pale seam. The fossil skulls tell on their owners. The art of being apex includes mistakes with good outcomes. Not all meals are physics problems. Out over the deeper water, a slick of oil and scale dust marks a kill you're late for, but the mosasaur shows up anyway because none of this food gets to waste. Scavenging is a form of ambition that accepts history. A downward peel, a roll, the long body turning into a corkscrew that brings jaws to bear on a floating drama already solved by someone else. The pterygoid teeth do their patient tug work. The mouth opens too wide and the animal takes in a section of yesterday as if swallowing a chapter. They were almost certainly born at sea. Embryos turn up entombed within the ribcage of adults. Neonate-sized bones mix with old ones in places that were never beaches. Viviparity fits the pattern. Squamates do it. The ocean rewards it. And nobody hauls a body this specialised onto land to risk everything for a nursery that will flood at the next moon. Picture it, a female hovering in calmer water, a slow shudder, a slick shadow unspooling tail first into its first breath. Instinct wiring flippers to motion before the water remembers to be cold. Elsewhere, detail keeps throwing elbows. On a Kansas chalk seabed, a plate carpus dies in a way that preserves not just bone, but hints of organ layout and the soft outline of a tail with a fluke. The fossil looks like a shadow that refused to leave. Above it, a smear of regurgitated belemnite guard says, "The last meal was enthusiastic and regretted." Beside it, shark tooth confetti says, "We appreciate your donation." Everything here eats until it is eaten. Everything writes a sentence in someone else's body. The ammonites, for all their caution and cunning, are slow tragedies. They boom, diversify, fill water columns with coiled ambition. They ride currents from continent to continent on invisible highways. They wear their 6 lives in their shells, macroconch and microconch, big and small, different enough that future people will argue about who is who and which is male and which is female, because the past doesn't label its closets. They lay eggs in rafts or singly or in discrete hollows, we guess, we infer, and the hatchlings join the glittering plankton until they graduate into the visible world and start making better mistakes. They bloom until a rock from space edits the ocean in a single afternoon. But that afternoon is not now. Now is a hot Cretaceous noon above a drowned prairie, thunderheads stacked over a shoreline of chalk. Below, a Tylosaurus ghosts along the margin, where clear water folds into turbid. It rides, pressure changes like a monorail, thermoclines, haloclines, the soft wall sound makes when temperature kneads it into curves. Ahead, a swarm of scaphites drifts in slow rotation. Their hooked shells like punctuation marks in a book that thinks it's writing itself. The mosasaur does not accelerate until the last 3 meters. Then the tail fluke punches, the skull tilts, the second row of teeth commits to citizenship, and the scene becomes paperwork. Far out in the phosphate seas that will someday be quarries, Prognathodon cruises the blue desert between productive oases. It passes through a shoal of baculites like a rumour you can measure, faces left, left again, then up, drawing lazy S-curves that herd the straight shelled into a clump. The strike is a sawed-off arc, a precision theft. One long cylinder disappears in a gulp, and shards of nacre spin down like cheap confetti. On the bottom, brittle stars reach for the glitter and erase the evidence with 10 arms each. You watch long enough and you stop expecting moral geometry. The ammonites are not virtuous. The mosasaurs are not villains. They are procedures, beautifully honed, running on fuel that swims. What feels creepy is the competence, the way a mouth and a tail and a set of joints can turn water into a solved equation again and again across an ocean that was a continent last week. The shells that drift past your face are diaries written in carbonate, and every entry ends with a signature, a groove, a notch, a healed wound, a perfect circle missing where something bit out the chewy centre and left the rest to art. At dusk, the surface cools by a half degree, and the breeze ignites tiny lanes of planktonic light. A mosasaurus breaks to breathe with a hush like a secret closing. An ammonite rises on gas and bad timing. A squally corax takes a triangle out of a turtle already flagged by fate. Add it all together and the Cretaceous doesn't roar. It hums, a steady machine noise of appetite, a dark industry powered by flukes and jets and quiet ancient math. The lizards run the night shift, the shells keep the minutes, and if you feel watched you are, not by eyes alone, but by a system that notices movement better than morality and has a place for everything you can be, including missing. The Miocene ocean doesn't chatter, it hums, an industrial pelagic thrum powered by upwellings and cold tongues of water gnawing at warm shelves. Baleen whales are everywhere, not yet blue whale enormous, but plentiful and smug, raking krill clouds with fringed mouths and the confidence of animals that think scale is a plan. They travel in lanes carved by wind and Earth's rotation, biological conveyor belts running from Peru to California, from South Africa to the western margins of Australia. Beneath them, as dependable as geology, moves the punctuation mark that ends sentences, a shark shaped like an imperative. You see it first as subtraction, light erased in a neat triangle that grows instead of fades. No showy dorsal, no movie-finned silhouette, just mass at speed, the tail a metronome of bad news. Its mouth is not a smile, it is a bracket. When it opens, the body behind it flexes to fire a pressure wave into the victim, a negative handshake that yanks flesh forward. The teeth are serrated wedges, thick and confident, a skyline of knives. At the edges, you can still see the fine crenulations where enamel met prey and did not apologize. Call it megalodon if you like tradition, otodus if you're feeling current. Either way, it spans half a city bus to a bus and a half, depending on which tooth you believe. A global product line that ships to every temperate and tropical sea the planet bothered to invent. Its prey selection strategy is unromantic. Target the caloric organs, flukes first, hamstring the engine, then the chest, lungs, heart, the power grid. Fossil baleen whale vertebrae carry those U-shaped bite arcs like old police reports. Here, here and here. Case closed. Whale ear bones show hacks and gouges. Jaws, healed and unhealed, record encounters that the whale turned into folklore or failed to. Even its waist testifies. Coprolites glitter with bone sand. The powder of ribs turn to chalk by serrations. When it misses, the ocean files the attempt as a bite mark that healed crooked. Move south into the Pisco Basin, where desert today covers what was once an assembly line for megafauna. Warm upwelling pours nutrients into the water. Anchovies become fillets with fins. Small whales migrate through in the thousands, their bodies writing annual ledgers in the food web. From the gloom rises the other candidate for CEO, a sperm whale that did not read Moby Dick. Moby Dick read it. The skull is a blocky cathedral, fronted by a mouth armed on both jaws with teeth as thick as nightsticks. Some are longer than your forearm with the root. Crowns themselves are blunt, hefty, meant to occlude bone. The name Leviathan fits because someone finally let paleontology be literal. The big supracranial basin suggests a fat, oily organ up front. Call it spermaceti for family resemblance, a structure that may have helped with sound focusing, buoyancy trimming, or headbutts delivered with legal force. It does not have to outrun a shark. It has to outthink a world. The eyes sit laterally but honest. The jaws fit like a verdict. The neck for a whale suggests mobility. Teeth on both jaws mean bite and hold, not suck and swallow. You picture it aligning alongside a mid-sized mysticete, lunging up at the flank, shearing a section away with a scissoring rotation, then repositioning for a second purchase as the blood fills the geometry. Tooth marks on fossil whale skulls in these strata aren't triangular slices. They're deep conical punctures, holes you can thread with hypothesis. Macroraptorial sperm whales did this, and they did not pluralize victim. Their guild is crowded. Before Leviathan, and with it swim the specialists, Brygmaphyseter, Zygophyseter, Acrophyseter, smaller, meaner-looking predecessors with the same teeth in both jaws memo. Picture a Brygmaphyseter intercepting a beaked whale surfacing between dives, the stealth bomber versus the commuter, then driving it downward, jaws clamped on the melon until the fluke stops writing. These whales bring sonar to a knife fight, clicking into the darkness, mapping panic in echoes. Whether Leviathan refined echolocation like modern sperm whales isn't written in stone, but the skull suggests it had equipment worth using. Either way, the hunting is not guesswork. It's geometry delivered by lungs. Where they overlap, the ocean draws partitions, coastal nurseries, quiet coves, warm bays, fill with juvenile megalodon teeth like rented knives returned small. The juveniles eat stingrays, small fish, small whales if they get cocky, and grow into the open water like ambition with a tail. You can kneel in certain Miocene and Pliocene sediments and sift a childhood out by the handful. Teeth paler from pocophosphate, edges still wicked, sizes telling a story of growth curves and safe harbours. Leviathan likely kept its young offshore, in water deep enough for secrecy and breathwork, guarded by a social structure that leaves no fossil, but makes too much sense to ignore. If Megalodon was a contractor, Leviathan was a syndicate with meetings. The conflict you're here for, the poster, the thumbnail, the who wins, doesn't headline every day. Apexes minimize injury, a broken tooth is paperwork, a broken jaw is bankruptcy. Encounters are negotiations at distance, a shark climbing up from the twilight toward a silhouette that is either dinner or a group of professionals, a whale rolling at the surface to breathe and reading the sea like a contract. When it happens, it's ugly. The shark comes from below, as tradition and physics demand, aiming at the tailstock to erase propulsion. The whale hears the pressure change before the shadow pivots 3 tons of head into a ramming line, and the world rings like struck metal. The shark's serrations peel skin in long commas. The whale's tooth sinks to the hilt between vertebral processes. Both back off because both suddenly respect math. But the overlaps are real. A drifting whale carcass, a whale fall, turns hierarchy into a buffet truce. First on scene, the shark because its nose writes in blood chemistry. One testing pass, a mouthful of blubber, a trail of glittering oil up to the surface. Then the whales arrive, not as the dead one's kin, but as opportunists with the right teeth for a difficult job. Leviathan shoulders in, anchors its bite into connective tissue, and levers free a slab. Smaller sharks swarm the edges, Isurus and Carcharodon prototypes carving confetti where they can. Down below, hagfish and sleeper sharks wait their turn with the patience of accountants. The carcass will feed a city for years once it hits bottom. Sulfophilic bacteria, mussels, worms with bone-dissolving symbionts, but for the first week it's all muscle and noise and territorial circles carved into water. Across the oceans, evidence accumulates like rumours that never needed to be false to be useful. Baleen whale ribs drilled by shark teeth that cut clean through cortex. Vertebrae with parallel tooth scrapes that match serration spacing on fossil lamnids scaled up to ridiculous. Mandibles from mystichites with conical pits aligned in a pattern only a macropredatory sperm whale's dentition can audition for. Dolphins with healed shark bites that look like commas. Sirenians with ragged arcs where a smaller otodontid practiced on armoured lunch. Megalodon teeth concentrate in sizes and wear patterns on certain coasts that smell like daycare. Warm, shallow, protected. High abundance prey that can't sprint yet. A nursery is a strategy wrapped in geography. Daily life is logistics. Off South America, a megalodon shadows a baleen whale pair migrating along the cold tongue, the shark's body a machine tuned to 10 to 15 degrees Celsius efficiency, muscle thermoregulation raised by a lamnid-style heat exchange that keeps the brain and viscera honest. It hangs 100 meters down where blue slips into work, reads the rhythm of surfacings, times the last ascent of the day. The strike angle is a line on a chalkboard. Come from below and behind, drive through blubber into muscle, rip sideways with the serrations working like thousands of tiny chisels in series. The whale's fluke shreds into ribbons of meat that spin away into history. The sound is physics in a meat suit. Elsewhere, an adult Leviathan escorts a calf across a shelf edge. The clicks roll out like a metronome speeding up, tick, 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 tick. Then a buzzsaw terminal buzz as the whale tightens the beam on a shoal of tuna big enough to be useful, or a delphinid foolish enough to be in the wrong column. The calf hears, learns, and stores the echo map under places where dinner hides. The adult hears something else, low, slow, big, and rolls to face it. A megalodon cruising by decides that today's numbers don't pencil. It veers off, not in fear but in cost-benefit. This is not to crown the whale. The shark's empire spans latitudes and millions of years. Its teeth alone colonize museums by the thousands, triangles of courtroom evidence you can hold with 2 hands and still not encompass. In some Miocene limestone quarries, they pour out of the rock like the sea still owes you something. Their edges are chipped, resharpened by meals, serrations dulled and reset by the next generation erupting behind like a conveyor. The jaw is a factory floor, shedding and replacing hardware in a schedule nobody has to remember, because the mouth remembers for you. Follow the money and your finger lands on upwelling maps. Where wind pushes surface water aside, deep cold rises, carrying nitrogen, iron, a pantry. Krill blooms, small fish stack, larger fish prowl. Baleen whales arrive to batch process the plankton. Sharks and whales arrive to batch process the baleen whales. Peru, California, Namibia, the Canary Current margins. These are not just places, they're architectures. If you lay the dots of fossil finds over ancient current reconstructions, the overlaps look less like fate and more like route planning. Then the ocean cheats. The Isthmus of Panama finishes knitting shut, redistributing currents like a stern librarian. The Atlantic cools at high latitudes. Polar regions take krill sovereignty seriously. Baleen whales evolve the full commute to the poles for a buffet, winter wear its civilized lifestyle, and push their peak feeding grounds into waters that punish ectothermic assumptions. The megalodon's nursery bays shrink as sea levels drop and coastlines redraw. Continental shelves narrow. Productivity concentrates elsewhere on schedules that don't match your growth curve. Competition tightens. An upstart great white with a faster start and a less horrifying electric bill can carve juveniles in the overlap. Killer whales, the Orkinos model, learn collective tactics and treat large prey like puzzles with solutions. The margin for error gets audited down to 0. Leviathan 2 is not immortal. His gift is big, warm blood and a mouth engineered for rivals that stop fitting in the habitat as prey sizes and ranges change. Its skull promises head-on arguments. The ocean rewrites the debate style. Macroraptorial sperm whales fade from the record as climate and ecology select for different misty seat, body plans and ranges. The giant modern sperm whale survives on squid in the deep and brags by diving, not by biting whales in half. But you're still underwater in the Miocene, and the ledger is open. A megalodon moves like a continent deciding to stand up. Up ahead, a Mistaceite cow flanks her calf, the pair skirting a front where green water meets blue, where clarity ends and safety lives. The shark doesn't see in colours, it reads density. It ghosts into the turbid side and tracks by turbulence alone. The strike is oblique, never straight, always a triangle, and the calf's course kinks as if the ocean's code just updated. The mother turns and rams, mouth open. In a roar, the water translates into nothing. Flesh racks across serrations and flares away. The shark lifts, shakes once, then vanishes into the wall. Behind, oil blooms to the surface, a slick the size of a stadium drawing petrels and future fossils. Far offshore, Leviathan glides in from the blue-black underneath a baleen whale that rolled the dice on open water safety. From below, the whale is a ceiling of muscle. The odontocraty rises along the flank and hits with an angled bite that starts at rib 3 and ends at rib why bother. Teeth chunk into bone, a twist levers free a section, a second bite anchors into the spine and the water fills with the particulate of ambition. There's no chase, there's management, a methodical reduction of moving into meat. You collect the paperwork later. A rib with beveled shark cuts and serration striations like a barcode. A tympanic bulla with a conical puncture that aligns perfectly with a giant sperm whale tooth. A vertebra with a both, because of course there were multiple vendors at this market. Nearby, a carpet of mollusk shells shimmer over a long ridge of bone. The ridge is a whaleful, reduced to architecture by years of microbial fireworks. Osedax worms have drilled lace into the remaining beams. Squat lobsters built cul-de-sacs at the joints. Predators cast the headline. Decomposers write the long story. There are quieter days. A megalodon drafts beneath a pod of pilot whales for hours and then drifts away because no individual strays into math. A Leviathan patrols a current edge and eats tuna until the night turns into a curriculum vitae. The creativity of killing relaxes into routine, and routine is the most terrifying invention of all. Terror that clocks in and clocks out. You keep waiting for the ocean to pick a champion so the documentary can end clean. It refuses. It prefers ledgers to winners, processes to protagonists. A tooth falls out of a shark's jaw and sinks tail first, burying itself point up in a sandbed where, millions of years later, a primate will pluck it out and feel very small. A whale tooth, yellowed and heavy, turns up in the desert 200 kilometers from any shore because the shore moved, not the tooth. On both, wear lines and microchips tell exactly how edges met edges, often and with enthusiasm. Somewhere between all those edges, two apex ideas coexisted long enough to leave the planet better at being dangerous. Drop past the last sun-stained meter, and the ocean goes from postcard to sermon. Blue turns to bottle green, then to indigo, then to the kind of black that has weight. The surface arguments, teeth versus armour, speed versus sprint, fade into a single older rule. You either waste nothing or become a biography for something that doesn't. The abyss is not empty, it just spends its light on other things. First, the commuters. Every dusk, the world's greatest migration rises in silence, the deep scattering layer uncoupling itself from gravity and drifting upward like a continent learning to hover. Lanternfish flare their tiny photophores and vanish by counter-illumination. Hatchetfish angle their mirrored flanks so the little light that remains skips away, and bristlemouths, small, sardonic, and likely the most abundant vertebrates on Earth, open-needle jaws in polite, perpetual surprise. Hundreds of trillions of animals, each the size of your thumb or less, ride darkness up for plankton, then pour back down at dawn in a rain of nerve endings. This nightly elevator is the ocean's conveyor belt, shuttling carbon into depth like a quiet tax scheme. When the planet breathes out, the twilight zone holds the lungs. Stare too long and the lights stare back. Bioluminescence isn't decoration down here, it's the alphabet. Most signals are cool blue-green. Water transmits that wavelength best. But some predators broke the rules. A dragonfish, Malacosteus, the loose jaw, faced like a straight razor, glides through with a secret colour. Dim, forbidden red. Lots of deep fish can't see red. Evolution ghosted that cone ages ago. Loosejaw kept the filter and installed a private lamp, a red searchlight from a cheap photophore. It paints prey that thinks it's invisible with a colour only it can read, then strikes with teeth so glassy thin they barely show under a microscope. Those teeth don't flash back light, they erase it. Nanostructure engineered by accident into anti-glare. The anglerfish arrive like punchlines you laugh at from a safe distance. A small one wafts past, small in the way a nightmare can be small, with a fishing rod growing from its face, lure pulsing like a heart that got the wrong address. A male, if he exists at all, is the size of her last appetizer. He will find her by smell, bite, and never let go. Fuse blood to blood, turn into a set of gonads with ambitions, and spend the rest of his life as a footnote attached to her circulatory system. Romance, but optimized. She, meanwhile, runs the lantern, call it bacteria paying rent, switching it on and off to edit at the attention of anything hungry, including you. A faint cathedral looms, then resolves into a colony pretending to be a single creature. A siphonophore, a rope of specialized clones longer than most whales are dreams. Zooids repeat themselves into function. Some swim, some sting, some just eat and hand over the calories. The whole thing drifts at procession speed, indistinct, beautiful, malicious only in the way landmines are. A fish wanders into the wrong centimetre and becomes a line item. Far below, another colony, Apolemia maybe, unspools like a star map, each light a mouth with a job, the colony writing cursive on the water until gravity edits it back into a loop. Your mammal brain wants a monster you can pronounce. The abyss offers a survivor that spells its name in silence, a coelacanth, a lobe-finned joke the Mesozoic forgot to cancel. It hangs in a volcanic cave wall off a tropical coast where day never mattered. Blue-white flecks scattering over scales like someone accidentally left a galaxy on. Its paired fins move like slow, thoughtful hands. Alternating beats, a ghost of walking preserved in water. Inside an oil-filled tube, the notochord stand-in does the job bones do for showier fish. The coelacanth's rostral organ, a little electrosensor in the snout, watches for muscle whispers in prey. It is all ancient verbs and modern patience, and no, it is not your ancestor. It's a cousin who refused terrestrial peer pressure and still shows up to reunions in perfect health. Nautilus drifts by like jewellery that learned calculus. Coiled shell partitioned into gas chambers, siphuncle threaded down the middle like a lifeline, tentacles sticky as secrets and almost transparent. It lives slow, writes a few new chambers a year, and dodges the ammonite's fate by existing where fashion doesn't. The shell sutures are modest, the life meticulous. In the head, a camera-like eye with no lens, pupil looking into seawater, reads edges the way you read a room. If ammonites were Baroque, Nautilus is a blueprint that never needed revision. Elsewhere, the abyss remembers teeth. A frilled shark wriggles out of geologic time, eel-like, rosette gills frilled and flourished, jaw bracketed with trident teeth so numerous a mistake is just a delay. It corkscrews around rippled sand, mouth open, face composed, and you realise you're looking at a hardware store from the Devonian that learned not to change the stock. A goblin shark drifts with everything stored forward of its nose, a flimsy-looking pink ghost until the jaw slingshots out on ligaments, like a sprung mousetrap, and the illusion of frailty ends up inside it. This is not nostalgia. This is continuity. Something larger condenses from the dark, clicks, testing the edges of you. Not a giant squid, though one of those is out there with the dinner-play eyes and hooks in the suckers, preposterous and somehow shy, but the thing that hunts them as if nightmares feed on hubris, a sperm whale. The head is a quarter of the body by volume, stuffed with wax and plumbing that can turn sound into a tool and a weapon. You feel the clicks in your bones before you hear them, then the rapid-fire buzz as it locks onto a target. Tick, 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 tick. Chainsaw rising, tick, tick, tick. The whale rolls, jaw hinges open, and the deep writes another quiet paragraph. Down here, the old macro-predation from the Miocene didn't vanish, it changed tactics, took a breath, and went deeper. Drop to the trenches and the world's physics starts negotiating with itself. Pressure stacks like debt. Each 10 meters another atmosphere, until at 8,000 meters it's an elephant perched on every postage stamp of your body. No lungs here, no gas bladders either. The fish that make it, snailfish, pale as a secret, fragile looking as tissue, are built of jelly and resolve. Their proteins are laced with stabilizers to keep the machinery from buckling. Their cell membranes are tweaked so pressure can knock politely and not be let in. One curls around a crustacean and nudges it into a mouth that doesn't look like it could offend anyone. It offends. Amphipods scurry past looking absurdly large for their job description, like cockroaches that trained in the Mariana. A tripod fish props itself on extended fin rays and faces the current, fins wide, miles of emptiness turning into a buffet by insistence. Even in death, the deep throws a party. A whalefall drops from the photic world like a cathedral slumping in slow motion. Stage 1, the mobile scavengers, sleeper sharks cruising like old furniture, 6 gills with eyes like historical documents, hagfish that tie themselves in knots to leave a flesh off bone. Stage 2, enrichment opportunists, crabs and polychaetes drilling chaos into the fat-soaked sediment, every square inch turned into someone's tiny real estate empire. Stage 3, the sulfophilic stage, which sounds like a band and functions like a religion. Anaerobic bacteria chew lipids into hydrogen sulfide, and chemosymbiotic mussels and tube worms build out of the fumes. Ossidax, the bone-eating worm, gardens the skeleton with scarlet plumes, mouthless, gutless, a bouquet of root-like tissues sunk into cortex. Males, miniature, dozens of them living inside the female's tube like punctuation marks, contributing genetics and nothing else, which in this economy is perfect. Hydrothermal vents don't glow red. The water does when it hits the cold and dumps its minerals in black smoke. Iron and sulfide snowing sideways. Out of that darkness rise red-plumed tube worms, riftia, who've outsourced digestion to bacteria living in their tissues. Their blood binds oxygen and poisonous sulfide at once with a hemoglobin chemistry so elegant it should wear a tux. Alvanella, the Pompeii worm, huddles in microclimates that flirt with scalding temperatures on one side and normal on the other, its back shaggy with symbionts that maybe insulate it, maybe just like the view. Crabs wave their claws in chemical gradients where the map says fire and the locals say Tuesday. The ecosystem runs on stone breath, not sunlight, which is deeply impolite to everything you were taught about food chains. Cold seeps show up to remind you vents aren't the only way to mint life without the sun. Methane bubbles from the seafloor like the earth forgot to finish a sentence. Brine pools form the undersea lakes, hypersaline, dense, with shorelines and little waterfall edges where normal seawater cascades in and loses the will to live. Mussel beds bloom, stuffed with bacteria that eat methane for a living. A swimming crab dips into the briny lake and goes still mid-stroke, preserved in the most literal sense possible. The jacuzzi of despair someone called one Gulf pool. Accurate. Also booked. You wanted echoes, the dark has a choir. Cookie-cutter sharks, tiny torpedoes with ice cream scoop jaws, rise from the OMZ, flash their bellies to imitate small fish, and then carve perfectly circular samples out of anything curious enough to look. Tuna come up with polka dots, dolphins with missing punctuation marks, submarines with official reports. Greenland sharks wander the polar deep at a speed that makes boredom look frantic, living centuries by replacing hurry with chemistry, eyes clouded by parasitic copepods wearing them like jewellery. Sleeper sharks in the abyss lumber past like moving taxidermy, slow, dense, and unfairly effective. Up in the low-oxygen mid-waters, the vampire squid minds its own business. It is not a vampire and not a squid, it is a museum of compromises with a cape. It does not attack plankton, it harvests the ocean's falling dust with sticky filaments, a detritivore in a tux. When something startles it, it inverts the cloak, inside out spiky, glows at the tips like a scandal in pearl, and then drifts away on low power mode, metabolism tuned to a crawl that would embarrass a glacier. Some mouths down here look like design reviews that got approved at 4 AM. A gulper eel yawns open and keeps yawning until the front half of the fish is a bag. The rest of it is string and battery. It does not ask whether it can swallow the thing, it tests whether the thing fits in the bag and answers the first question with that. A barrel eye hangs under a ceiling of cameras, eyes pointing straight up through its transparent skull, yes, actually see-through, tracking faint silhouettes above while the mouth does what mouths do at a 90-degree angle. If you came from the chapters of guillotines and buzzsaws, you expect spectacle. The abyss provides audit. Here, spectacle burns calories. Here, success is subtle. Eyes that gather photons so greedily they feel like theft. Enzymes that keep membranes from folding under pressure. Proteins salted with compounds that arm wrestle the physics of water and win. Trimethylamine oxide climbs with depth in fish tissues, a chemical armour against crushing. You recognise it as the smell of ocean that clings to your hands after handling a fish. That ammonia ozone tang that means someone down there solved a problem you've never needed to know existed. Now and then the old theatrics get a cameo. An oarfish, ribbon-bodied 15 metres of silver rumour, undulates up from deeper water into a diver's peripheral vision and spends an afternoon causing folklore. A giant aesopod trundles across a slope like a helmet with opinions, pausing every few metres to remember what it was doing. A Dumbo octopus claps its ear-like fins and hovers with the poise of a ghost that refused to audition for horror. The ancient peeks through not as fossils, but as strategies that never stopped working. Your flashlight, if you brought one in this metaphor, doesn't reveal, it interrupts. Everything down here sees pressure before it sees you, smells iron before it smells fear, hears your bubbles like boulders rolling down cathedral steps. You feel alone only because the witnesses don't file noise complaints. The deep is crowded, just not with apologies, and still the surface meddles. The migrants that grease the planet's carbon pump are now caught between light hunger and hook hunger. Sound travels far and fast, and suddenly the water is full of ship heartbeats and low-frequency thunder that steps on the voices of whales and the click grammar of things that hunt by echo. Plastic snowdowners, a new kind of marine fallout. Microfibers lodging in twilight fishes that will never learn the word fashion. Even here, in a place built on thrift, we've taught the abyss about waste, yet the ocean keeps its ledger. Every night the layer rises, every dawn it sinks, vents flare and gutter and reignite, cities born and buried in mineral frost. A whale dies and writes a 40-year neighbourhood into the dark. A coelacanth rotates a fin and remembers a coastline that drowned before mammals had decent posture. A nautilus adds a chamber while the moon pulls a tide that never reaches it. Sharks older than forests cruise at a pace that scolds ambition. The abyss doesn't do nostalgia, it does continuity. If the earlier seas were about the invention of fear, this realm is about its administration. No crown, no coronation, just policies that never expired. See well enough even when enough is almost nothing. Move precisely because every calorie has a lawyer. Buy only what pays dividends. Hide your light unless the light is the trick. Wear the armour inside your cells. You hang there in the warm gear of your imagination and feel the cold press around it like a truth. Far overhead, wind writes white cursive on a surface that will never know you are here. Far below, the mud keeps secrets at a rate that terrifies history. Between those two infinities, something blinks an eye the size of a thumbnail and decides whether tonight you are contrast or background. The ocean remembers every monster it ever made, just keeps their descendants quiet.